Hey everybody, and welcome back to the History of Video Gaming podcast. Today we are doing our first episode on the Magnavox Odyssey, and of course I have here with me Ben. How you doing today, Ben?
I'm doing pretty well. How are you, Wes?
I've been doing great. So what games have you been playing recently?
Before we get into the Magnavox, I do want to talk about Assassin's Creed, because I've been playing a lot more of it.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, it's kind of been a love-hate relationship, really, because at times I'm like really into it, and then at times I'm just like opening up locked chests for like hours. So I don't know. I think it's definitely one of those games you have to be in the mood for, and I was definitely in the mood for it. But every time I like play a little bit, I'm like, there's a missed opportunity. There's like a glitch that almost broke my game, you know? I mean, it's terribly glitchy. I'm playing Unity, by the way. Which is kind of old, but it's still like just littered with bugs and littered with like jank. Like you'll be like trying to run through a doorway, and your guy will like hit the side of the wall, and you're like, what are you doing? But yeah, I feel like that's the Assassin's Creed experience, really.
Yeah. I feel like Unity's kind of notorious for that too, but I know there's always some good bug videos whenever a new Assassin's Creed game comes out.
Oh yeah. I mean, and the story, I feel like, is kind of, it has a lot of potential, and then like things happen, I'm like, what's going on? Like I think at the heart of it is kind of like a Romeo and Juliet situation, where like Juliet is a Templar and you're an assassin. I'm
gotcha,
like,
yeah.
oh, okay, that could be good, you know? And then like something happens and you guys are separated, and then the next like 7 missions you never see her, and I'm like, what are we doing? Or like you'll see her do a mission, and then they'll like bring you out, and you're in not like modern day or something, and you're like, just get me back in here, you know? I don't care about all this like side stuff. So
really just stop all the momentum they had building with a brick wall.
Yeah, exactly. I think it had so much potential, and then sometimes the decisions, I'm just like, what's going on? Like, I'll say like minor spoiler, but you kind of like one of the master assassins goes bad, and you have to track him down and kill him. And then I was expecting like this big fallout to happen, because you just killed like a master assassin, and you get back and they're like, we're going to send you on this fetch quest as a punishment. I'm like, what the hell was that? No development. I was like,
no honor
okay.
among thieves, I guess. That's
but yeah, it's been all right. I've been enjoying it. Still playing, which I kind of thought I'd be sick of it by now, but I'm still playing. So,
yeah,
what have you been playing, Wes? Hopefully something not as frustrating.
Frustrating, but in different ways. I've surprisingly yet again still been sticking to that Gungeon life. Entered a Gungeon, trying to get further in that. Been loving it, but I usually just play 2 runs after work, get kind of pissed, and then stop playing it.
Yeah.
So I'm still loving that, and excited to keep grinding it out, learning the synergies and stuff between the items more. But I've also saw they added a bunch of updates to Dauntless, which is like a free-to-play Monster Hunter-like, sort of.
Okay.
And I played that a lot before, but I haven't played it for a couple months, so I might jump back into that over the week.
Okay, that sounds good.
Yeah, it's been a good time. I'm loving it.
You're definitely into those like roguelikes, I guess. Is Dauntless a roguelike too?
Dauntless isn't, no. That's like a third-person, sort of like Soulsy in the way that you're dodging stuff, but it's Monster Hunter in that you just go on missions, hunt monsters, get monster body parts, and make cooler weapons, that kind of thing.
Is it like a MMO or something? Like, how is it free? There's
a lot of cosmetic stuff you can buy.
Oh, okay. I see.
And I think there might also be some like skill kind of stuff you can buy to like make your weapons better. I forget though. I haven't played it recently.
It sounds fun though.
Yeah. It's a good time.
Before we jump into Magnavox, there was something else I wanted to ask you, Wes. Last week we were talking about Oregon Trail because you played it, and I was thinking about it a lot, and I was like, you know what? Beating Oregon Trail, how many people can say that they've done that? Like nobody. That's an accomplishment. I feel like if anyone's ever beaten Oregon Trail, like the one that we remember, I feel like that's a lifetime accomplishment. So I wanted to ask you, now that you've beaten Oregon Trail, how does it stack up against your real like favorite video game accomplishment?
Oh man, yeah, and that definitely. I mean, I don't know if I might be being a little too humble. I don't know if the version of Oregon Trail I got was easy or what, but just the name recognition of it alone, saying that I beat Oregon Trail is pretty sweet.
Yeah.
And I'd say the other thing I'd compare it to is just some of the bosses in Dark Souls that I've beaten, like the first time in Dark Souls 1 that you go up against Ornstein and Smo, which is a notorious boss just because you're fighting two guys at once.
Mm-hmm.
That's a pretty good feeling. I tend to like that because you get the heart rate going and a lot more tension. Oregon Trail for me was just like, oh cool, I made some decisions and I did it.
Yeah.
But both definitely awesome accomplishments. What about you? What do you think would be your top accomplishment in gaming?
I'd probably have to say something StarCraft 2 related. Probably getting diamond on the ladder would probably be my top accomplishment, although I didn't stay there very long. I did get there.
You did get there.
Either that, or I've also got 100% of the achievements in the Wings of Liberty campaign. And I hope to get 100% achievements of the other two campaigns, but I felt really good about doing that.
That's right. I remember that because that's when we were roommates.
Yeah. So definitely StarCraft 2 related for me. I think otherwise I play kind of casual games for the most part. I do like my strategy games, but they're kind of harder to if saying you've won Civ is like, okay, well everybody's at least won Civ once. So,
right, yeah, without the sort of context and knowing the whole campaign, it doesn't sound like it means as much.
Yeah, but something like that are games I tend to play more often. So yeah. The more difficult achievements just kind of related to StarCraft. Actually, you know what? I just thought of a new one,
yeah.
Back when I played WoW in high school, I built my own guild up from nothing to over 500 players. Seriously?
And you started it?
Yeah. I was just
that's pretty cool.
I was just like in I was the guy who like spammed like the chat, please join, blah blah blah.
The recruiting chat and all that.
Yeah. And I don't know how many active people I had, because I think a lot of them were just like people left. This was like in Wings of Liberty Cataclysm sort of times, and people were starting to leave the game. So like I only had like maybe 200 people active at any one time, but I was still like really happy about that.
That's pretty impressive.
Yeah, that might be my top achievement. I didn't like do anything other than recruit people, but
right.
And host like events and stuff, but
hey, still, that's something. You got a community of people that you made in WoW.
Yeah, for sure. So that was fun. I think we should get into Magnavox.
Yeah, let's do it.
So before we get into the timeline of the games, we're going to spend just a little bit of time here at the beginning to talk about the piece of hardware itself. So the Magnavox Odyssey is the first home video game console ever released. It launched in September of 1972 and was produced all the way to 1975. Its developer was led by a guy named Ralph Baer, and he kind of started having this idea as early as, I want to say, like the 60s or even the 50s, I want to say. And his prototype name was called the Brown Box. And over time, the Brown Box changed and evolved many times, which maybe Wes can talk about a little bit more later. But when it launched at a price of $100, which in today's money is almost $600. So this is like a full price console, even more so than like our PS4 Pro today or whatever. And it launched with 13 games. It launched with 2 controllers. It launched with an instruction book, overlays, which we'll talk a little bit more about later, dice, poker chips, game boards, play money, cards for different games, like gaming cards. And, do you have anything to add, Wes, about the hardware side?
Yeah, sure. And one thing I did want to say, when I was doing a little bit of research on it, Ralph Baer, who came up with the idea, originally his goal was to make it a $1995 system, so only under $20. But after Magnavox picked it up, they messed around with it and did a couple changes and ended up shipping it for $100, which at the time, definitely, that was a big chunk of change.
Yeah, it was. And I feel like a big part of that was the electronics, like inside of it. You know, I don't think it was like we think it's going to sell best at $100, you know, the kind of decision.
Right. The changes Magnavox made to it, I think, just to make any money off of it or to make a decent bit, they kind of had to sell it for that much.
Yeah, because you have to imagine at this time, like, the smallest kind of gaming cabinet, if you will, has been an arcade machine in computer space. So, like, the Odyssey is like the size of like a PS4 or something. So, I mean, they really like pack stuff in there.
And just to briefly cover how the actual cartridges work, it's cool when you think about like N64 is the touchstone for me, but for other people it might be the Sega Genesis or the original Nintendo. But they had game cards all the way back with this first home console, and they basically were circuit boards that just changed how the Odyssey system interpreted different button presses. So that's how you got the different games, because it would say, okay, this button means a different thing when this game cartridge is inserted.
Right.
Which kind of blows my mind a little bit. I guess that's in some way how all of the programs work. And the max that it could really display was just 3 square dots and a vertical line.
Yep. And all the games that we're going to talk about today and for next episode just use those two, what was it, three squares and a line?
Yeah, I think that was the max it could display, but I know most of the games that I played at least only ever had 2 squares max.
Right. And just so everyone at home can kind of picture this, the controllers that the Magnavox Odyssey used were consisted of like 3 knobs or dials and 1 reset button. So like there was no like 4 buttons or you know, kind of traditional setup. It was very, very different from what we know now.
Yeah, both the dials on the side too, which ergonomically I don't know if I get, but maybe it worked okay at the time.
Maybe they were going for like a motorcycle feel or something. I don't know.
It kind of does look like a little motorcycle.
So why don't we, do you have anything else to add, Wes, before we go into the games themselves?
Oh, well, I did want to say one of the games that I think we'll be talking about next episode actually included the first light gun controller.
Yes.
That they could use on a home system, and it was basically like a lever action Winchester looking thing. I don't know how much input you had with it, but you could point it at the screen and it was an actual light gun as early as 72.
Yeah, we'll definitely talk about that more on the next episode. So for this episode, we're going to talk about just the games that launched with the original console, which it launched with 13 games. And before we get into the games themselves, actually, I do want to talk about the overlays. So how the overlays worked was, you know, we just had like a black screen with like 2 squares on it. But in order to get people's imagination involved, Magnavox published these like little, I think they were plastic or something, screens that would like stick to the TV, and you could see the lights through them. So there would be like, for soccer or whatever, there would be like a soccer field, you know, a static image, and then you could play with the moving lights underneath of it that you could see through. And all the games that we play, both for this episode and next episode, are going to use those overlays as the graphics, because otherwise it's just a black screen with like 2 white dots.
Right. Yeah. It's hilarious. This whole system, it's, you know, basically that's all it is, but they found different ways to make all these different games by adding, you know, the poker chips and the cards and the cling wrap overlays just to put 13 different games at launch.
Yeah. So without further ado, let's get into the timeline.
And the first game that we're going to be talking about today is the first one that shows up in the instruction manual for the Magnavox Odyssey, and that is table tennis. All of these came out at the same date because they were released at launch. But in the manual, you get an idea of what this one was meant to be, because it says the basic Odyssey game to develop your electronic coordination.
Oh.
It's kind of the most basic one, and I guess they're saying, hey, there's some crazy Magnavox games that are going to be coming after this, so prepare yourself with table tennis. As far as I know, this one actually didn't use any of the plastic overlays because it was just the vertical line, which was the sort of net in the middle, and then the two squares, which represented the players, and a very tiny square in the middle, which represented the ball. And this one might start to sound kind of familiar because it did go on to inspire Atari when they made Pong. And later, Magnavox did sue them because they made Pong, and it was so similar to this, but we'll touch on that when we talk about Pong itself.
Yeah.
And for the gameplay of this, there wasn't any scoring on the screen. You all had to figure it out, probably with pen and paper, and just do it between yourselves. The manual goes into detail that it has to go off the backside and miss, and you have to volley 3 times for a score to count.
Interesting.
And if it goes off the side, it just resets the ball, and you have to manually use the reset button on the controller to get it to show up back in the middle. Otherwise, I think it just kind of drifts off into blank space forever. And it's a very simple game, and you can definitely tell when you're playing it that it's a precursor to Pong. One thing with the controls that I didn't realize when I first played it is there's no sort of like directional input to the ball when you hit it with your player. If you come at it, like a 45-degree angle from the bottom, it's just going to go horizontal.
Oh, really?
Yeah, the third dial on the Odyssey controller is actually to adjust the ball. So you manually move the ball up and down to fake out the other player instead of hitting it at an angle.
Oh, that's kind of interesting.
And in the version I played, you can control it on the other side of the net. I don't know if that's intended or not.
I think that is intended.
It seems like it, because I could just keep moving the ball back and forth, trying to dodge, even though it's on the other side of the net. So in general, it's very similar to Pong. That's kind of what I was thinking the whole time. I tried to disassociate a little bit, but it's hard not to compare it because they're so similar. But Pong really does seem like the more advanced, and it came later. So playing this one seemed a little bit like I could be playing something that does a little bit more than this.
Yeah.
And I ended up reflecting that in my ratings. I gave it a 3 out of 10 overall. It wasn't super fun to me. It's weird that you can't hit things at an angle and have it go where you think it's going to go. And it just took me a long time to get used to the controls of adjusting the ball up and down after I hit it to control where it went.
Right.
But to be fair, the AI in the emulator I was playing was a little strange because it was programmed to exactly mirror the ball, I think. So
okay.
I'm not going to say it was impossible to get it past, but I was not able to.
That's funny.
So on to the other ratings I had. For graphics, I was maybe a little generous, gave it a 2 out of 10 because it actually has moving graphics, but it's still just a bunch of squares on a screen. Sound, the system didn't have any sound, so I gave it a 0 out of 10. Gameplay, I gave it a 2 out of 10. Partly, again, I'm sure because I'm playing this and constantly comparing it to Pong in my head, so I know that it's not what it could be, maybe. But for relevance, I gave it a 6 out of 10 because, of course, it's going to go on to influence one of the biggest names in video game history. And also, it's the sort of introductory game to this first home gaming console. So I thought that made it pretty important because it's supposed to kind of show you what this console can do.
Yeah, for sure. I remember looking into table tennis before I handed it off to you, and one of the things that I thought about right away was that you can like move your square that hits the ball like anywhere on the screen, like even in your opponent's side if you wanted to. So
yeah,
even though you weren't supposed to, I feel like the opportunity for cheating or getting angry and just saying like I'm just gonna do it is pretty high, especially if you're playing against a person.
Yeah, I don't know how many games I'd last before I just go onto their side and constantly smash it over to the left side of the screen.
Yeah. Because like I think in all of Odyssey's games there's no like boundaries, so your like little square can literally move anywhere on the screen, and there's nothing stopping it from going anywhere other than it might like disappear if it hits something. But there's no like boundaries in any of these games, which I think is kind of interesting, and I feel like makes it ripe for cheating.
Yeah, maybe it was just a more trustworthy time back then, Ben, and everyone was playing fair games of table tennis on their Odyssey.
Maybe you're right.
So the next one that we have in the timeline is just a honorable mention. It's tennis, basically table tennis, but there is, instead you have to keep it in the center squares, which represent the tennis court. And I think there is an overlay for that one too, to have the tennis court laid out. And the next one that we have is hockey, which is also basically table tennis, but they have different goals on either side of the screen that the ball needs to go in to score.
I think those two games are good examples of how Magnavox was able to like say they had 13 games on the system, but they really only had like one, and they had like 3 overlays for it. I mean,
Right,
they were
exactly.
a little different. So, but when you only have 3 squares in a line, that's gonna happen. I feel like.
Yeah, you got to make the best with what you got.
Yeah. So moving on from hockey was my first game that I played, which was Ski. This does have an overlay, and the sort of premise behind Ski is it's kind of just a one-person game. The other person is like keeping track of the score or time, which of course is going to be objectionable, which I'll talk about in a bit. But basically, the overlay had a like path on the screen that it wanted you to follow, and if you followed it well and you didn't like go outside of the screen, you weren't penalized. But if you like left the line, you would get like penalized, either points or like a second would be added to your time or something like that. And there were 3 different tracks that you could do on the one overlay. So you had sort of like a beginning, medium, and long track that you could race your friend in. Even though a lot of the times there was a lot of overlap on the tracks. So like the long track is like just the medium track, and then like a little loop at the end, so you had to do it backwards. And so it wasn't like 3 unique tracks by any means, but I thought it was kind of interesting. Again, I think the hardest thing is, for one, as far as I know, maybe you can help me with this, Wes, was table tennis just like 8 directional in terms of movement?
It was, yeah. You have, or well, only 4, I think, because you can only go left and right, then up and down.
So you couldn't go diagonal, you don't think?
Well, you know what? If you did both the dials at the same time, yeah, you probably could go diagonal.
Yeah, I think Ski is the same. And the problem with that is, in Ski, the track is in like a circular motion a lot. And you can't really go in circles like when you're just limited to like 8 directions. So you go off the track pretty often, and actually it was really hard to control because, at least in the emulated version I played, your square was really fast. So if I pressed the keys just a little too hard, I'd like fly off the screen. I'd get like 30 points or something. And the goal of the game is to have as few points as possible. So it was no good. But I played a couple times. You can play using a point system. You can play using a time system, which the timing system is the only one that makes sense, because otherwise you could just like go really slow and be fine. Right. But I thought overall it was kind of I don't want to say it was a great game, but I believe it's the first sort of racing game that we've ever come across. And for that reason alone, I thought the relevance was a 5 out of 10. Because I don't think it was like very influential in terms of the racing scene, but it was the first racing game that you could race against your friend, even if it wasn't at the same time. It was based on your other friend being there with a stopwatch, ready to, click you and see how fast you were. So I thought that made it kind of interesting. As far as graphics goes, I gave it a 1.5. I thought the overlay actually looked kind of nice. It had like little mountains and trees and stuff, but at the end of the day, it's just a one screen, and your single box moves across the lines as you push it, but nothing else is moving. I think after a certain amount of time, it's going to get really stale, and so that kind of leads me into gameplay, where I gave it a 1.5 out of 10 as well, because I do think it was kind of fun and interesting for like a couple minutes. And then it's like, well, there's only 3 tracks, and the tracks recycle the same track a lot. So I didn't think there was really all that much to the gameplay. And, with it being hard to move in a circular fashion, I just thought, it's kind of janky. It's kind of like boring. Gameplay is 1.5 for me. And obviously it had no sound. So overall, I gave it a 2 out of 10. Obviously, definitely not as influential as table tennis, but considering it was the first sort of racing game ever developed, I definitely want to give it props, and was definitely a good move on Magnavox's part to add it in with their console, because it does feel different to almost every other game in the console. So, Ski.
Yeah. I think it's, with all these, you have to remember that behind that overlay, it's just a square moving on a screen. So
yeah.
Even if these games aren't that fun, the fact that they were like, how the heck do we make this square interesting is kind of incredible. And they came up with skiing after staring at that square for who knows how many hours.
Yeah. It's also funny because, there was no score on the system. There was no timer on this system or on this game. So, once you got to the end, you just had to trust that your friend that you were racing against ended at the right time.
Right, yeah.
So, again, as with almost all of these games, I feel like cheating pretty heavy on Ski. Especially because you might have, left the track for, 2 frames, and it's your friend's like, you left the track, and you're like, no, I didn't. I feel like that would happen, immediately. So moving on from Ski, I've got a couple honorable mentions here, mainly based around kind of the racing concept, but not necessarily racing. So the first one is Simon Says, which is a pretty interesting one. This one uses cards that come in the box of the console. And so you've got this deck of cards, and one person will draw, no, it's a third person draws a card from the deck, and it'll be like little boy's hand, and on the screen you've got your overlay, and it's a boy body and then a girl body, and you have to, whoever gets to the hand first gets the card, and then at the end of the deck, whoever has the most cards at the end wins. So kind of a weird one, I think. But it was sounds okay, I guess.
Yeah, maybe the precursor to those Harry Potter games where you had to draw out the shapes for the spells with your wand.
Maybe. Although I think the Harry Potter games probably would have been better. This was 3 people.
Yeah,
playing.
just sitting and...
I don't know. I don't think it would have been good, but it existed. We can say that much. The next game is called Cat and Mouse, and this one I think has potential, but basically one person is the mouse, and they're on the top left hand of the screen, and one person is the cat, and they're on the bottom right, and the mouse has to get into his little mouse house, which is the bottom middle, we'll say, and the cat just has to try to catch the mouse. And again, the overlay has this maze sort of thing where you're supposed to stick in the maze, but again, the game doesn't know that underneath the overlay, so you could just walk through a wall, touch the mouse, game over, which I feel again would happen all the time. But that's what Cat and Mouse is all about. Our next game here is called States. This is a state trivia game, which also used cards. I don't really understand what it had to do with video gaming, because basically you had a map of the US on the screen, which was the overlay, and then you used your console to point to the state that you wanted to guess a card from, which you could just point with your finger, and I feel like it would be the same. So I don't really know, if that was a good one to include in their pack, but they did it. So
they had to fill out that 13, and they figured a glorified map and laser pointer was the way to go.
That's right. And I feel the state trivia, I've read a couple cards. They're serious questions. It's what is the flower of Alaska? And you're what? So I
can tell you Pennsylvania's beverage is milk, but that's about all I got.
Well, see, I didn't know that. We're from Pennsylvania, so why don't we get past states? Can you talk us through our next game, Wes?
That sounds like a good plan. Yeah, so this next one is a case of being incredibly inventive with what they had, and this is one that I actually got to play a little bit, quote unquote play, and it's called Haunted House. And the main thing with this is this huge haunted house overlay that goes over it that has like cool cartoon drawings.
Yeah, definitely one of the coolest overlays, like right off the bat, I have to say.
Yeah, it looks like they put a lot of cool stuff into it. It's most like visually interesting, I'd say, out of all the ones. And I'll read the manual description real quick just because I think it's hilarious. You are the detective groping in the dark as cats, bats, skeletons, and a disappearing ghost guide you to a secret treasure. Fun for all ages. And that's basically it. And I feel like that gets the grasp of it pretty well, but there's two different players when you're playing this, like most of them. One person is the ghost, and the other is the detective. And I'm going to spend a lot of this time probably just explaining how to play it because it's super complicated and I didn't get to really play a full game. So to start off, the ghost has to hide behind a random point on the map, which are called clues, and I think there's 13 of them total. There might be more. And when they do that, they have to tell the detective in real life to turn around, and then they take their controller from them. And when they move the detective square on top of the ghost square, it disappears. So that's gone, and the detective has no idea where it is. Next, the detective starts and just has to progress through the haunted house on a set route, which I thought was really confusing because you don't get to decide what you're doing. And collects clues along the way, which you have to get in the sequence. And basically, the end goal is once you find the secret treasure, you have whoever has the most clues, which were physical cards that you got handed out, that the ghost handed out to you. Whoever has the most clues wins.
Wait, how do you get clues?
So you get clues. So I'm getting lost even describing it because it is. I was reading this like 5 times over, like how the heck? But you get clues just by when the detective square, which is, basically the Pong square lit up in the background, when it lights up one of the clues on the map. They're like the colored sections. It's like either a cat or a skull or a chandelier. And just when you pass through it, you get a clue, is basically the only condition.
Okay.
But you have to pass through it in order to be able to actually get the clue. So if you like jump up to the second floor and illuminate a bird cage or whatever it is, you don't get that clue.
So the square is like hidden, right? You don't really know where the square is the whole time? Unless
your square
you pass
you do,
over.
because I think it shines through the overlay, or at least it would shine through the overlay a little bit.
Okay.
The ghost square it disappears. That's part of the game, so it's actually like not on the screen anywhere after you hide it.
Why would it be?
And that comes into play because it hides behind a clue, and when you're one clue away from it, the player who's the ghost hits reset so that their light shows up, and the instructions specifically say that you have to yell boo. And then they just have to sit there as an obstacle, and that's all the ghost does the whole entire game. They can't move.
Sit there.
They just show up in that spot. So when they hit reset, their light reappears on the clue.
Yeah.
And since you have to travel in a set direction to get all the clues, you basically just can't get past the ghost. And the instructions say that there are secret passages you can take, but I couldn't find them on the map, and I didn't see them in the instructions, so I don't know if they were talking about just moving the square wherever you want to.
Maybe.
But yeah, that's my basic impression. I think you can kind of tell me going over it is that I'm in general lost, and it's an interesting concept, but it seemed really weird to me that it's all sort of randomness. There's strategy in where the ghost hides because it's when the detective gets blocked, but there's also this event that happens when the detective gets to the 3rd floor that can randomly send him to another spot and basically circumvent the ghost, not the goat. So I was confused the whole time I was playing this. I messed around a little bit, but it's supposed to be 2-player, and I don't really know. But I think it had a lot of fun ideas that maybe weren't executed super well. But considering what they had, just 2 squares and an overlay of a haunted house, it's pretty cool that they came up with this whole almost board game idea to go with it.
I see. When I was looking at it, I thought, you know how like the haunted house is like black, and
right, yeah.
all the clues and windows your light can shine through. So I thought, is it like you're trying to go through the path, but since you can't see the light when the black house is on it, like you could go the wrong way or you overshoot or something, and that's how you miss clues.
Oh, and maybe that's an aspect that I didn't think about for it, because the version I was playing, you couldn't see through the clue to see like if your block was behind it, but that's possible. Yeah, I forget when I was watching the original videos if the haunted house itself was transparent or not.
I think it's opaque. I could be wrong about that, but that's what I thought was going on. I feel like there's definitely a lot more going on than I thought, but
yeah, so it could be just a case that after looking at it, I still don't get it, and maybe I'm not giving it the credit that it deserves, but regardless, with the experience that I had with it, I'm going to go over some of the ratings that I gave it.
Yeah.
So graphics, I gave it a 2 out of 10, maybe a little bit harsh, but the haunted house overlay, as we said, whether you consider that it's graphical, even if it's not an actual video game rendered graphics. So I figured that in because it was really cool. It had cats on it. I like cats, so I figured that's a win.
There you go.
Sound was 0 out of 10 because it doesn't have any sound. The gameplay, for me, it was a 1 out of 10. I just have written here complex and very strange, which sums up my experience with it. And for the relevance, I said 2 out of 10. If I'm being hopeful, maybe this is the sole inspiration for Luigi's Haunted Mansion, but I figure it's probably not.
Probably not.
So overall, I gave it a 2 out of 10. I think the idea is really cool. And again, as we're saying with all these, the fact that they could come up with that when all you really have is 2 squares and you have to make these overlays, I think that's incredible. But the gameplay wasn't doing it for me.
Yeah.
You could probably have fun a couple times, but I don't know if it'd be much good after that.
Yeah. Doesn't hold up. I feel like we've got like good board games now too in today's time. So
right, so maybe we're spoiled. This was like the peak of gaming, but I'd rather just play I can't even remember it, but the Haunted Hill one or whatever, where you have to solve the mysteries.
Yeah, what is that? No. What's Haunted House on the Hill? Is that what it's called?
I think so, or at least something like that.
Or
we'll
even
look at
like
it
Clue
somewhere.
Like when
even Clue.
When I first saw Haunted House, I was like, oh, you got Clue cards? It's probably like Clue. It's like, it's not.
It's not. The Clue was literally would say skeleton and then would have a picture of a skeleton. So I don't get what the clue is there.
Well, you would have passed over it, right? And then you got that card.
Right. So I think the idea is you're bringing all these clues to the secret treasure for undisclosed reasons.
I like it.
So moving on to the next one that we had, one of our honorable mentions was football. This one was also extremely complex. It had cards, dice, variables, and calculations that you could do for how the wind was affecting the ball. And you could basically just make stuff up and kind of cheat every play if you wanted to. So another one that we didn't get to play but seemed interesting, at least, and worth mentioning. And the next one is Analogic, which is a math board game that uses the video basically to represent a board game token. And it kind of seemed like a Scrabble board, but having math involved somewhere along the way to have you determine your turns.
So after Analogic, I got to play Submarine. This was another one that I got to rate. And how Submarine works is one player is a square on the left-hand side. It cannot move, but they have a fire button, and like a little tiny square will shoot out from the left side, moving to the right automatically, and then you use your knob to make it go up or down. Kind of like how I did in table tennis, I think. But yeah, it moves like left or right automatically. So you just controlled up and down and fire, which it could only have one dot on the screen at a time. So as soon as it left the screen, you could fire again. And then the other player would play as what's called, like, their character was like the convoy, and they had to try to follow this really long and complex like maze path to try to, I don't know, like go around in tons of circles before just going like underneath the submarine and leaving. And the game was kind of like, if the submarine hit the convoy, it got a point, and as soon as the convoy left the screen and finished its path, the two players would switch sides, and whoever killed the most convoys would win.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. I honestly, I was pretty impressed with this game because controlling the sub and shooting at the convoy was like pretty satisfying. You had a really large amount of control where like the bullet went, and I felt you had a lot of control of being able to kill the convoy because the convoy's on like the set path and it can like stop or go backwards, but it's really hard to do that. And even if you did, the bullet moves really fast and can like turn like on a dime. So I feel like the submarine probably killed the convoy most of the time. That being said, like the convoy, it's going all along this crazy path, and again, since there's no real boundaries, I feel like cheating is a big part of this game as well. Just like barely going on the line sometimes, or like dodging out of the bullet's way. But I feel like the game at its core was really interesting because both players were like really tense about it until the convoy left the screen at the very, very end. Because up until that point, anything could happen. And even if one player lost like 20 convoys before they finally got one through, like it's not over because they just had to kill 21 of their opponent's convoys. So I thought overall it was a pretty good idea for a game. I thought it had a little bit more complexity to it with the bullet being like a moving sort of AI controlled object that you had some influence over. Although I feel like the gameplay is also kind of flawed because the convoy kind of can do whatever it wants. It doesn't have to stick to the path if the controller doesn't want it to. So
you gotta trust who you're playing with. Trust them to be good convoy drivers.
Well, and the convoy map, by the way, is totally circle-y. So I don't know how they're going to do that, but overall, I gave the gameplay 3 out of 10. I think it's kind of solid, actually. It definitely kept my attention longer than Ski did, and longer than I think most of these games would. And I do feel like it's probably one of the kind of keynote games of the whole console, besides table tennis. For sound, obviously, it's a 0. For graphics, I gave it a 1. The actual overlay of this one is pretty boring. It's basically just white with like radar lines to make it look like a radar, and then the like a little token of a ship, a little token of a convoy, and then like a giant path. That was just like a like a dotted line sort of, which I feel like they could have done better with that one. Like maybe having it like on the sea would have been good. I don't know, maybe that's just me.
It's a flying submarine, I guess. It has homing missiles, so who knows?
Yeah, I don't know. But for relevance, I give it a 4 out of 10. I do think it's relevant in the fact that I feel like this is one of the more iconic or easy to play games of the whole console pack when it launched. And it also is interesting because it kind of feels like almost like a chase scene, like in like you would see in like Call of Duty or something, where like one person's trying to get away, the other person's trying to track him down. That's kind of what it felt like, and it did feel like there was a lot of tension when you were playing the game, which I thought was pretty good. So for relevance, I give it a 4. Probably didn't actually influence anything, but as terms of influencing how the Magnavox was received as a whole, I feel like it definitely helped. So overall, I gave it a 2 out of 10. Submarine, pretty good. I kind of feel weird because like 2 out of 10 is the same thing I gave Ski, but I definitely think Submarine plays better. But Ski was like the first racing game, so right. The relevance helped it a lot there, I think.
But yeah, it really does sound like that's an interesting one to kind of be able to create that tension and almost dynamic gameplay for just having those two squares and inventive ways to use them.
Yeah, like I'd say like if this game were in an arcade like today, like I could see people playing it, and to have it, on your console at home, I think it's pretty good. And so we've got one more game that we're going to talk about today. It's another honorable mention. Magnavox Odyssey, the console, did ship with 13 games, and this is our 12th game. The 13th game we're we're going to talk about next episode. And the reason is you had to fill out a survey to get it. So you didn't get it right away. And so we'll talk about that next time with all the other games that you were sold separately. But our last game that actually was included when you bought it day one was Roulette, which is probably the stupidest game of the whole console. Basically, how you played Roulette was you closed your eyes, you pressed and turned all the knobs as crazily as you wanted to. You stopped, opened your eyes, and then whatever number it was on, that's what the roulette wheel was. So, yeah.
People must have lost tons of money betting on that virtual roulette.
I mean, considering the console was what, almost $600, I'm pretty sure people could have just bought a real roulette table for that.
Right, yeah. And it probably looked pretty nice, too.
Yeah. It's just a plastic overlay of a roulette wheel and then like a square dot again on a circle. So I think it even had there was a setting where it's like, if it flies off the screen, do this. And I'm like, it's probably pretty likely to fly off the screen.
Yeah, if you're just twisting everything every which way.
Yeah. So the 12 games of Magnavox Odyssey, September of 1972. What do you think, Wes? Worth $600?
I'm going to say a hard pass on that one. Might be worth the time I put into playing all these to get their historical context, but I don't know if it's much beyond that.
I do think, it is like pretty amazing what they did for what it is. I will say that.
Absolutely. And the fact that it was the first home console in 72, I bet you sat down with all these different games and it was revolutionary.
Yeah, and it's kind of crazy because the next console I don't think comes out till 75. So this is like 3 years ahead of anybody in the game, at least. Wow. And technology is going to start really picking up here. So that's like something to say.
Yeah,
I think
pretty impressive that it could hold its own for 3 years.
Yeah, it eventually would sell 350,000 units, and it's debated about whether or not it was like successful sort of launch and product. Obviously, Magnavox and like Ralph Baer say it was very successful, but there's also some evidence that it almost got like pulled like once or twice. They did make a couple more games that we're going to be talking about, but not a whole lot more. I don't think they made any games after 1973, even though it was continued to be produced till 75. So, I would say successful in a way, and then maybe not so successful in an economic way. But I'm very excited that we've got here because I feel like, this is the first time. Well, I don't know. I was about to say the first time we've got multiple games and sort of like one sort of box, but I guess the mainframe computers at the time could also play multiple games. However,
right.
This is the first to use cartridges. It's the first to use to ship with like controllers, and the first one that did ship to people, because I think mainframe computers, the average person didn't have access to those. It was just arcade machine games, which of the ones that have predated this, it's just been Computer Space Galaxy Game and I think Star Trek. So this is a different Star Trek. We'll talk about a different Star Trek next time, but I think that's it. So this is sort of people's first real experience, like like an average person's first experience to play a video game. And I even remember reading that video game, the word like didn't even exist at this point. It was called like an electronic entertainment gaming system or something.
Right, yeah.
It wasn't a video game console. So very interesting. I'm very happy that we've gotten to this point. We are going to continue with Magnavox in the next episode. We're going to talk about all the games that were sold separately during Magnavox Odyssey's launch, because it did launch with, I think, 20 something games. However, half of them you had to buy individually, which, by the way, I wanted to ask you, Wes, what are your thoughts on the console shipped with 13 games, but if you buy a console today, doesn't it only ship with like one game or no game, and then those games are like $60 more?
Yeah, and I'm not. I mean, I haven't bought a console in a long time, PC
me
Master
neither.
Race and all that, but I don't even know if they do the one game. No, I think they usually have at least one launch game that comes with it. But yeah, it's kind of crazy that, well, we talked about what these games basically were, but still, 13 games.
I mean, you got
It's
them
pretty
all
dang good.
with the console, right? So I don't, it's not. I don't think it's that bad.
Yeah, I think the idea then was that it's, that's the whole experience. The idea of selling games probably didn't even
That's
pop in
true.
people's head.
Yeah, I mean, they did. So they were going to sell games in packs separately, but
Right.
I don't think like selling games one at a time were something that they were considering, because all those games they sold separately were in like bundles of 4 or 5, which we'll talk about more next time. But yeah, I just think I think it's like definitely a landmark in gaming history. If I would say like what Magnavox Odyssey, like the relevance of it as a whole, I'd probably say like 7 or 8, like pretty high.
Yeah, it's the birth of home gaming. So if you think about it in that sense alone, it's got a huge impact.
Yeah, for sure. So I hope everybody listening feels the same way me and Wes do about this. Like, we're super excited, and we hope you guys are at home too. Thank you for listening. Please check out our website if you want to learn a little bit more about these games, especially the honorable mentions. I've done like write-ups on all of them, so be sure to check that out. Link in the description. We will see you guys next time. Have a good one.
See you next time.